Welcome, everybody. Just giving it a minute for people to trickle in. So feel free to just get settled. It's great to see how many people are joining us today. We have a full house, as it were. Great. Well, we already have a good 400 or so people tuning in. So we're really excited about the interest in today's lecture. I'm delighted to welcome you. Today's program is the Ida G. Diskant Memorial Lecture, Rediscovering Judith Leister. My name is Linnea West. I work in public programs at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So today we are using one painting by the artist Judith Leister as a starting point to learn about the artist's career and to open up some context around how the work is shown today and how it has been seen in the past. Before we get started, I'd like to invite Greg Diskant to say a few words. Greg's family created the Robert and Ida G. Diskant Memorial Fund that endows this annual lecture. His mother, Ida, was a Sorbonne-trained art historian who worked at the museum for many years. So Greg, please.
Thank you, Linnea, and I'm glad to see or virtually see so many people here today. 20 years ago, after the deaths of our parents, my sister Carolyn, my brother Jim, and I created the Robert and Ida Diskant Memorial Endowment to fund this lecture to honor my mother for her many years of research and teaching here at the Philadelphia Museum. The occasion for the lecture has always been a very meaningful one for our family. It's a time to think about our parents and the rest of our family as well. And the lecture this year is particularly meaningful because it comes just a few weeks after the death of my sister Carolyn, who was herself a Diskant lecturer. Carolyn, I called her Carrie, was like our mother, a art historian. She graduated from Wellesley College in 1974 and got a graduate degree at Penn in 76. And then she married the love of her life, my brother-in-law, Jeffrey, and they moved to Hong Kong, much to my mother's dismay. In Hong Kong, Carolyn raised a family, two wonderful sons, Chris and David, and she began a teaching career. She was a professor at the University of Hong Kong, teaching in English. She was a widely admired teacher. Her lectures were very popular. And after her children were grown, she finally earned a PhD as well from the University of Manchester. In 2012, Carolyn and Jeff came back to the US and they settled in Wynwood, just about a mile and a half from the house in which we grew up. And in 2014, to my great delight, Carrie was asked to give the Diskant lecture. And she did it here at the museum on the subject of her book, Saintly Brides and Bridegrooms, The Mystic Marriage in Northern Renaissance Art. The book's a lavishly illustrated and fascinating study of art that depict a male and female saints as brides or bridegrooms of Christ, still available online. I may be biased, but Carolyn was an amazing lecturer. She avoided jargon entirely, and she made art accessible to pretty much everyone. Carrie's Diskant lecture was, to my mind, far and away the best Diskant lecture ever. I may be, I have a horse in this race, of course, but perhaps today we'll hear an even better one. Carolyn died just before Christmas, but before she did, I was able to tell her that today's lecture would be by Frima Fox Hofrichter, and Carolyn was very pleased. She was enthused because she's familiar with Frima's work. She admired it, and at the time she looked forward to hearing this lecture. So on behalf of the Diskant family and my late sister Carolyn, I am very pleased that we are gathered together to hear from his lecture, and we look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're so grateful to be able to offer these lectures every year. Just a note, I think there might be a slight problem with my audio, so I apologize to everyone out there who hears a slight buzzing, but I won't be talking so much. We're so happy that joining us for today's discussion is Frima Fox Hofrichter. Frima Hofrichter is a professor at Pratt Institute, New York, author of Judith Leister, a woman painter in Holland's Golden Age, and the forthcoming anthology, Women, Aging, and Art, among other titles.
Nice to be here.
Welcome, yes. Frima's pioneering research on Leister did much to clarify the artist's achievements and to rectify some creative attributions of Leister's paintings to other artists. So thank you again for joining us. We are also joined by Nicole Elizabeth Cook.
Hi, everyone.
Nicole Cook is Program Manager for Graduate Academic Partnerships at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She holds a PhD in art history with a specialization in early modern art. She curated the installation, What Can Paintings Tell Us? And this installation features work by Leister and other artists. It's also on view now for those of you in Philadelphia. Today, Nicole will speak first about why she included Leister's paintings in the installation. And then Frima will share some of her groundbreaking research into Leister's career. Altogether, they're going to speak for about 45 minutes, and we're saving time at the end for your questions. I can't wait to hear your presentations, and I just have a few quick notes for everyone in the audience. Please use the Q&A box for questions. During Q&A, that's where I'm going to look, and it has a helpful upvote feature. So if you see the thumbs up symbol, you can click on it, and it'll send that question to the top of the queue, and those are the ones we'll answer first. We will get to as many questions as we can. We'll also be using the chat, and I'll be sharing links out there to further resources. The program is closed captioned, and you can use the CC button in your Zoom toolbar to turn those on or off. And finally, we are recording the program, and we're going to send a follow-up email that has a link to the recording as well as any other links I shared in the chat. So you will have those to refer back to. All that said, Nicole, I'm very happy to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Linnea, so much for that introduction. And thank you, Frima, for being here, and Greg for that really lovely remembrance. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. So this program today grew out of a small one-room exhibition that I curated last year called What Can Paintings Tell Us? And you can see a view of the gallery here. Don't worry, we'll be seeing some closer up views of a few of the paintings. And here I also want to thank Head of European Paintings, Jennifer Thompson, and former Philadelphia Museum of Art curator, Christopher Atkins, for the wonderful opportunity to curate this show and work with these paintings in the collection. What Can Paintings Tell Us focuses on a selection of paintings that were made in Europe between the 1400s and the 1700s, sometimes called the early modern period. This time period brought major innovations and new developments in the arts and humanities, including the artistic phases that today we know as the Renaissance, the Baroque, and the Rococo periods. Because of the distance from these paintings made hundreds of years ago from our own time, researching them involves a unique set of challenges. There's no artist we can call up, there's no gallery we can contact to ask about someone's work. The paintings in this installation are each in the process of revealing new insights about the artists who made them and about their original functions and circumstances. They are really, in a sense, telling us things. And in museums, we have to constantly look for new ways of listening. We have to look closely at works of art, not just for what we expect to find, but also for what we might not expect. There are 3 works related to women artists in the installation, which you can see here. In the case of early modern women, and with underrepresented artists in general, close looking becomes even more vital. Patriarchal and sexist restrictions made it more challenging for women to train and work as professional artists during these centuries. And yet, many women persisted in making art. Researching them is challenging, both because these women were disenfranchised in their own time period and also in subsequent histories of art. And here you can see closer views of the 3 paintings we just saw installed in the gallery. I'll spend just a couple of minutes talking about each one of these 3 paintings to lay the groundwork for Dr. Hofrichter's deeper dive into the life and work of Judith Leister. Judith Leister's The Last Drop, which you see here, is a highlight of my installation and a highlight of the entire museum collection. It's a brilliant painting of contradictions: virtue versus vice, life versus death, warning versus humor. And Judith Leister herself was an exceptional artist in several ways. She lived from 1609 to 1660 and was a rare female professional artist. She joined her local artist guild, she trained students, she made money off of her work. And yet, we almost never knew any of this. Beginning even during her own lifetime, her works were sometimes creatively attributed to better known male artists, including this painting, which was previously attributed to Frans Hals, and her legacy was largely forgotten. This painting experienced several different iterations of its history. It looked very different than we see it today at different moments in time in the past. And so momentarily, you'll learn much more about this painting, about Leister, and about her long process of rediscovery from Dr. Hofrichter. I'll now briefly point to the other 2 paintings in the installation linked with female makers. In this small painting of a young woman drawing, we see some of the more frustrating aspects of researching pre-modern women and their art. Here we see a young woman studiously working on a thick stack of drawings she holds in her lap, while other drawings and a portfolio, likely holding even more drawings, sit on a table in front of her. This detail of the painting shows how carefully the artist who made it rendered the different kinds of papers and different drawing materials. And it demonstrates their intimate understanding of artistic practices during the 1600s, when this work was likely produced. Around the time that this painting entered the Philadelphia Museum of Art collection, it was attributed to a female artist from the 17th century named Gesine ter Borch, and you see works by her on either side here. Gesine ter Borch was an amateur or a non-professional artist who worked in the later 1600s, and she's now known for her hundreds of watercolors. She was also the sister of more famous male artist Gerard ter Borch. Curators and scholars de-attributed the painting in the Philadelphia Museum of Art collection at Center soon, based on a complete lack of concrete evidence linking it to Gesine ter Borch, although there is overlap in the painting's interest in art making and drawing practices. Subsequent scholars seemed flummoxed with attributing the painting to any other artist after it was de-attributed. Notes from the 1950s and 1960s quote various visiting experts, giving statements like, "Not Gesine ter Borch, doubtful who did such a picture." Another expert said, "It was certainly not by Gesine ter Borch. He started to give an attribution and decided he didn't know who painted it." And so the work, after being de-attributed, becoming quote unquote anonymous, never went on view in the museum, and research on it largely stopped in the 1970s. Until last year, when I quite literally, the painting was fine, don't worry, but quite literally stumbled across it in museum storage. I was able to work with conservation fellow Sarah Mastrangelo to surface clean the painting, although it's still covered with a thick layer of yellowed varnish. And so this painting quite literally still has new layers to be revealed. I'm continuing to research this painting because I believe that, despite not knowing who created it yet, it still offers insights into how early modern women were thought about and pictured in the 1600s, and especially women who made art. This is also a great example of how research at the museum never really ends. Even though this painting has many questions right now, every year brings the potential for new discoveries. The last painting in the installation that I'll talk about jumps us forward about 100 years to the later 1700s. Dutch artist Maria Lafargue or Lafargue's painting shows a mother tending to her young child as a female domestic worker brings in a tray of coffee. And I think that this painting is also interesting because in this and many of Lafargue's intimate scenes of daily middle and upper class Dutch life show how she was influenced by paintings from the previous century. While she's not well known now, she was a working artist during her lifetime. Lafargue most likely learned to paint and draw from her brothers, who ran a family printing shop and primarily made illustrations for books. Maria Lafargue also supported herself as a drawing teacher after her family suffered bankruptcy and the family workshop dissolved. Sadly, she ultimately died in poverty. When her painting entered the Philadelphia Museum of Art collections, it had an unclear attribution in the early 1900s. By 1911, it was attributed to a contemporary male artist from the 1700s named Vibrant Hendricks. You can see here on the right. Just a couple of years later, it was de-attributed from him and published as, quote, Dutch artist of the middle of the 18th century, unquote. And attributions to other male artists bounced around during the middle of the 20th century. It was not until decades later that a visitor to the museum was actually able to recognize Lafargue's signature and date, just barely visible on the doorway just to the left of the female domestic worker. And this is really difficult to see in any reproduction, so I've also included some other examples of her signature from other works here. This discovery led the way for the painting to eventually be cleaned by museum conservators and rehung in the galleries. The stories of these three different paintings, Lafargue, our unknown artist, Judith Leister, show what I think can be both sometimes exasperating and also thrilling about researching women artists in museum collections. Leads run cold and then run hot again years later. Women and the artwork they produced are separated, lost, and sometimes found. Judith Leister is a spectacular example, going from being almost completely erased from history to now being one of the most celebrated painters of the Dutch Baroque era. Each of these three paintings remind us that a keen eye and taking the time to look closely at artworks can make a huge difference in what we know about them. And this is a strategy brilliantly employed by my fellow speaker, Dr. Frima Fox Hofrichter, who I'll hand things over to now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Philadelphia Museum for inviting me and for all your kind words that we've just heard. And the Diskant family for generously sponsoring this lecture series. And now I'd like to introduce you to Judith Leister. And she's happy to meet you too. You have just entered her studio. She pauses at her work, lifts her brush from her painting, and turns to you with an arm hooked over her chair, exuding self-confidence, a smile of friendship, and asks if you'd like to go to lunch after this lecture. Of course, I don't know what she's saying, but in her movement facing us, she appears friendly, engaged, and certainly alive with personality, heightened by her open mouth. And this is known as a speaking likeness. The open mouth was a typical compositional device to magnify lifelike qualities, especially for artists in the 1620s and 30s, such as Frans Hals in painting and Bernini in sculpture. But its use is more unusual in a formal self-portrait. This was, I think, a very special self-portrait, executed to be given to the Guild of St. Luke of Haarlem, the Painters Guild, when she became a master in 1633 at the age of 24. It is the size required by the new rules, and it would have hung in a room in the Prinsenhof, a building which no longer exists. And this is the painting I think she made upon becoming, as this is the painting I think she made upon becoming a master. It is her master's piece. And that is where we get the term masterpiece, not meaning the most beautiful or finest work, but that work which culminated in acceptance as a professional painter. As a master painter, she could have students and get tuition for them, sell her paintings, and have other benefits as a member. And we know that she did have at least 3 students, all men. We don't have any signed work by them, but they may be responsible for some of the contemporary copies after her paintings. In any case, she certainly would not have been painting wearing this outfit. Her collar with lace edges would never survive a painting session undamaged. And those long lace cuffs would be equally at risk. So instead of showing herself in work clothes, she portrays herself as a wealthy patron would be seen. By wearing this, Leister indicates she can paint lace and buttons, stomacher and skirt, and a fabulous collar with a translucent cap, all that a prospective patron might want to see to hire her. And so now we should turn our attention to what she is painting. It is a genre painting of a dancing, singing fiddler. Her self-portrait then shows she is adept as both a portrait and genre painter. The fiddler isn't some random example, but a figure copied from her own Merry Company, which may have been one of her most popular paintings. And I say this because of the number of copies or versions even known today. Leister is making an association that she is the painter of that work. But that is not how the painting began. This infrared reflectograph from the National Gallery of Art reveals that a different painting was once on the easel, that of a young girl, or some say another self-portrait, which you can see in a smaller format just under the fiddler's head. But Leister clearly changed her mind and may have done so to show her versatility as a painter of portraits and genre. This change also gives us a glimpse into her working method. As we can see, it is not an isolated example. But before we go on, I want to point out that that checkerboard you see in the X-ray is not about paint at all, but is seen because the panel has been cradled. It's an old conservation method to keep the wood from warping, and is no longer used today. I'm showing you a sample on the upper right. So now I can tell you to ignore it in the checkerboard. The X-ray of this enduring painting at the National Gallery, London, reveals that the cat the boy holds was in at least 3 other positions until she settled on the 4th last one seen in those rings. And perhaps you've already discovered the other major change in the painting, in the costume of the little girl. You can see where the arrow is on the right, that she once wore a kerchief held at the end by her fist in the center. Now she wears a ruff, and her hand is still in the same place, but now holds the cat's tail. Although Leister may have made preparatory plans, she seems to have completed the final composition of her painting right on the easel. We have no drawings by her. Perhaps she made them and tossed them. I should also say that that's not that unusual, as we have no drawings by Frans Hals or even by Vermeer for that matter. So now that we've gotten a glimpse of her paintings, I want to fill in a little bit more about her life. Judith Leister was born in Haarlem in 1609 and lived most of her life in that city. You're seeing two views, city and country, and for the most part, this 17th century Haarlem is still recognizable today in the city square and across the dunes. She was the 8th of 9 children, born to parents who were, with many others, emigres from Catholic Antwerp. Her father was a smallware weaver, that is, in the larger linen business, who branched out by buying a tavern and malt house, an excess which would later be the cause of his bankruptcy. Thus, she is one of the few women painters who did not come from a family of painters, although she would later marry into one. Indeed, most male painters also came from families of painters. So her early move to becoming a painter in her teen years may have been a result of her father's bankruptcy, which I will explain in a moment. Her father's malt house and tavern was named the Leicester, and the family took their name from it. And this is quite common. Thereafter, the family used Leister, spelled several different ways, as their name. It means leading star or lodestar, pole star, guiding star. And that was the name that Judith Leister always used and signed documents with, and created a monogram that would pun on that Leister name. There are several documents that link Judith Leister to Frans Hals, but none specifically indicating that he was her teacher, although there are elements of her style in some paintings that parallel his. But she may have studied with the de Reber family of painters in Haarlem, where a daughter of that family also worked in their shop. This is in fact suggested by Samuel Amsing by some verses in his book, The Description of the City of Haarlem. The description did not mean just geographic, but it identified noteworthy members of the city in their history and in their contemporary world. He even proudly pointed out that the quality of painting was so good in Haarlem, they even had women painters. A Latin edition of the book was published in 1627 and a Dutch one in 1628. And this is the first time Judith Leister is mentioned as a painter at about 17 or 18 years old. Amsing uses side notes that we see on the left to comment on his main text. On the left are some of the names of the de Reber family. Franz Greber with his son Peter and daughter Maria. And then there is an asterisk at the name Judith Leister. I indicated one in the Dutch text in orange so you can see it more easily on that line. And there is another asterisk in the text that is probably meant to connect the two. The text says, now I have to mention Greber, the father and the son and the daughter I have to praise. Whoever saw a painting by the hand of a daughter? Then the asterisk at the line, see here, another who paints with a good, keen sense, and continues. The Grebers are well known because of their big pictures, portraits. Who saw that somebody's hand and mine were playing here in a bolder way? So another who paints with a good, keen sense is surely Judith Leister. And perhaps she is also referenced in that last line, the question, who saw somebody's hand and mine playing here in a bolder way? And Amsing's use of an asterisk is not just a reference note, but also a pun on the star of Leicester. Although he wrote his first edition in 1627, we have no paintings from her dated that early. the first is 1629. But it's clear that even as a teenager, her work was worthy of mention. Her connections with the de Kreber family may be related to the fact that they were excellent painters of embroidery and woven work, and Judith may have entered their workshop because of embroidery designs she learned from her father. As a result of her father's humiliating bankruptcy, her parents left Haarlem, 1625, 1626. There is no evidence that Leister went with them. She may have gone to work with the de Krebers during this time, living with them or with one of her many elder brothers and sisters in Haarlem. Leister is mentioned once again, 20 years later in 1648, by Theodore Schrevel in his own History of Haarlem. He wrote, "There also have been many experienced women painters who are still renowned in our time and who could compare with men. One of them excels in particular, Judith Leister, the true leading star in art, as her name signifies. She is the wife of Molenaar, likewise a renowned painter, born in Haarlem and well known in Amsterdam. Indeed, Judith Leister married a fellow painter, Jan Meens Molenaar, in 1636 in Haarlem, and the couple almost immediately moved to Amsterdam, where they remained until 1648. During this time, they were not permitted to become members of the Amsterdam Guild, but they bartered paintings for goods and invested in real estate. They bought houses with some cash and the promise of paintings, and then rented the houses out for cash, and then repeated the process, but not always supplying the paintings. In Amsterdam and then in Haarlem, Judith bore at least 5 children. She never actually had 5 children living with her at the same time, as several died quite young. When she dies in 1660 at the age of 50, she left a 17-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son. The son would die a few years later. The daughter is the only one of her 5 children who lived to maturity, was widowed 3 times, and had several children, the eldest named for her parents. The 1660 burial notice for Judith Leister in Heemstede, just outside of Haarlem, is the last time her name is cited anywhere, in any document, museum, or is associated with any painting until the end of the 19th century, some 250 years later. Even in the postmortem inventory of Molenaar's estate, that is, after her husband passed away in 1668, her name isn't included. There were several paintings by her listed in the inventory, but they are recorded as being by the wife of the deceased or by Mrs. Molenaar. The name Judith Leister is not mentioned again until 1893. In 1893, the painting on the left was sold in London by one dealer to another dealer as by Frans Hals. I show 2 of Frans Hals's paintings on the right of laughing, colorful group scenes, just to give you an idea of why they thought this painting, now at the Louvre, was by Hals. In addition, it had been recorded as by Hals since the 18th century. But toward the end of the 19th century, with the rise of Impressionism, the name Frans Hals was newly acclaimed, as the Impressionists, and famously Van Gogh, loved Hals's free brushwork and use of color. Thus, a Hals painting would go for quite a lot of money. But it seems that the noted Dutch art historian Cornelis Hofstede de Groot was in London and saw the painting and recognized that he had seen this monogram before on several other paintings and realized that it belonged to Judith Leister. The monogram can be seen on the table runner just above the violinist's shoe. And as you can see, it is a J conjoined with an L as they share the same vertical line, and then a lodestar horizontally bisects that vertical line, clearly creating a pun on her name, referenced by both Singh and Shrevel. The painting by Hals may have fetched a great deal of money, but there was no track record for a painting by Judith Leister. And so the dealer who bought the painting sued the other dealer in a London civil court with a jury who never saw the painting and never heard the name Judith Leister. It was settled out of court, and it seems now that the court case was a sham, and the two dealers, relatively new to the art scene in London, wanted to create some publicity. Meanwhile, Hofrichter wrote an extensive article revealing 7 paintings, all previously ascribed to different artists, now to Judith Leister, and each bore the monogram of Judith Leister. And that was her rediscovery. Some years later, in 1927, another art historian, Julian Harms, wrote her dissertation at the University of Frankfurt on Leister, and this was published in a series of articles in Out Holland. There didn't seem to be any major reaction, although in the next few years, there were articles mostly uncovering archival material that provided her year of birth, for example. But then it was in the 1930s Germany, and we hear nothing more of her even after World War II until 1971 with Linda Nochlund's essay, Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists? Soon after, Anne Sutherland Harris joined Nochlund to research their groundbreaking exhibition, Women Artists 1550 to 1950. And it was at about this time I heard Anne Harris lecture on old master women artists, who for the most part, no one in that packed auditorium had ever heard of before. After that lecture, I approached Anne and asked to work on Leister for my master's thesis with her as my advisor. Later, Judith Leister was the subject of my doctoral dissertation, lectures, articles, a book, exhibitions, and I'm still talking about her. This slide is my way to show you many of Leister's works. These are several, but not all, of her monogrammed paintings. And you can see that she executed portraits, still life, but specialized in genre painting of single figures, multiples, and those that relate to interactions between men and women. There are daylight scenes and intimate ones at night. The green dots are where her monogram appears on each of the paintings. So it's not in some regular place, like always on a piece of furniture or always on the back wall, which makes it a bit difficult to find, especially if you don't know what you're looking for. 2 examples of her monogram are on the left. You can see that they're not exactly alike, but both clearly show a JL and a leading star. You'll also note that those monograms bear the date 1629 and 1630. And yet she becomes a master only in 1633. Presumably, she sold these paintings under her name. It suggests that the guild rules were ignored, probably as a matter of course, which is why they were rewritten in 1631 with a new effort to enforce them. Within this array of her paintings, I want to note a few of them. The Tulip Page, which is a sheet for and from a tulip bowl catalog. There were many during the height of tulipomania and after, is dated 1643. This is the type of work that would have been made looking at a real, perhaps recently cut tulip. So we can presume that it was executed sometime in March 1643. In that same month of March 1643, Leister had a baby. In fact, the girl who will outlive her. So rather than stopping her work for her family, we can see her adapting to a small format that could be done at a table, even while rocking a cradle. Indeed, she and Molinar may have shared a studio after their marriage, and we know from documents that she handled the business end of their livelihood. The beautifully painted and composed flute player in Stockholm was one of the music-associated paintings in the small Leister exhibition celebrating her 400th birthday at the National Gallery of Art in 2009. Actual early musical instruments were also displayed, having been borrowed from the Smithsonian. Just before the opening, several curators of the instruments from the Smithsonian came to see the exhibition. A discussion began as to where music makers, those who made the actual instruments, signed their work. And it was reported that flute makers signed on the mouthpiece. A few steps away, we saw that that is exactly where Judith Leister placed her monogram, on the mouthpiece, punning on being the maker, of course, of the painting, as well as the painted flute. By the way, it's very difficult, even in a slide enlarged, to show you the monogram here. So I've just left the green dot there. The painting on the right, known today as the Proposition, was the first iconographic study of a Judith Leister painting. It is a scene of a man with money in his palm and his other hand on the woman's shoulder, hitting on her. My interpretation, using emblem books and an altered copy of the painting, suggested this is a painting of a sexual proposition, thus naming it, and painted from a woman's point of view. But I do want to turn my attention to the Philadelphia painting advertised with this lecture. But when I first saw it many, many years ago, it didn't look like this. It was instead like this, with only two figures drinking and smoking. And it was so long ago that it was called the Gay Cavalier, only meaning happy. In that first visit to see it, I recognized her monogram on the overturned tankard held in the dancing man's hand, a monogram that hadn't been noticed before. But when the Philadelphia painting was first recorded in 1903, it was in a collection with this other work, The Merry Company, which we have seen before. They were considered a pair. Indeed, they were then the same size. The left Merry Company has since been cut some. The bright red clothing is seen in both, and the themes of the two paintings are connected. We're possibly viewing moderation on the left, although with drinking, smoking, and dancing, while on the right, it is one of excess at night with a tankard already empty. Drinking and smoking were considered similar sins, as smoking, and not just tobacco, was called dry drunkenness, leading to, in Calvinist Holland, otherwise frowned upon activities, including dancing. But of course, most people participated in all of these. I also knew of another painting, almost like your Philadelphia one, but not quite as well painted, probably a workshop painting, except it had a third figure between them. I approached the museum asking if they would clean the painting. Because of the chance that Leister had painted over the figure herself, indeed, we have already seen that that is quite possible, and there was no full-time conservator then, they declined and the painting remained as it was. But for the 1993 large Leister exhibition in Harlem and Worcester, Massachusetts, celebrating 100 years since her rediscovery, Philadelphia then did have a conservator, Mark Tucker, who is now senior conservator here. And the painting was cleaned, revealing, like that other painting I mentioned, a third figure. But before we see that, I want to point out the table leg as well as the lit candle on the table, which will remain but have a different function. So when it's cleaned, it revealed this. A full-size skeleton holding a skull and an hourglass with time running out. It is all a bit of overkill. This is the same painting that just before had only two figures, but the painting with two figures no longer exists, except in my slides. And the contrast between the merry company and the drinking at night is more stark. With two men, you didn't notice that anything was missing. The lit candle, which stood on the table, is now held in the hands of the skeleton. And the leg of the skeleton got turned into a table leg, with the foot of the skeleton actually always there. This skeleton is, of course, death. Conveniently, neither man notices death, which is why it could be so easily painted over. And this idea was found in Renaissance prints too, where death as a skeleton appears to individuals or couples, although they don't see or recognize it. But not noticing death was the point of those prints and of this painting. Death is always there, or death is always here. And no doubt that's why it was covered up, I assumed, by an art dealer sometime at the turn of the 20th century who wanted to sell the painting and realized that not too many people want a specter of death hanging in their homes. So this is now how we see it today. And as most of you have always seen it and have always known it, it's now renamed The Last Drop, referring both to the image of death and the overturned tankard. Just to put this all together, we started with the self-portrait and examined the painting on the easel, which is a detail of a more popular painting, which was one paired with night drinking and smoking of two figures. And today we see it whole with death, with the three, as it was meant to be. But so one led to the other, led to another, and two of the paintings I showed also originally had other images now hidden. Some of this, covering up, painting over, cutting down, or just neglected, can happen to the works of many artists, but perhaps more for those ignored for a few hundred years. But that's what has made working on her so very enjoyable. But this isn't a story that ends in any melancholic way. As today, she is honored in her hometown of Harlem with a street named for her, Judith Leister Straat. There is a Judith Leister tulip. I would have preferred it be a brilliant red, but no one asked me. And there is a Dutch foundation for mid-career women artists named in her honor. And now a few hundred of you know her, and the name Judith Leister lives on. Thank you.
Frima, thank you. That was really wonderful and provides such a great sense of Leister's remarkable career. Nicole, I think you did a great job of contextualizing this. Just a reminder to everyone out there, The Last Drop and some of the other works Nicole showed, they are on view now if you wanted to come see them for yourself. We have some time for questions, and we've been getting great questions in the Q&A box. I hope all of you, if you have questions, now's a good time to put them in, or if you see a question in the Q&A that you want answered, to use the thumbs up feature. It's hard to even know where to start because we have so many great questions, but perhaps one that I will start with is a question from Ted Gallagher, who asks, did Leister have any commissions, or were her works all made on spec?
Oh, that's a very good question. Because most Dutch artists did not have commissions, except we can say for portraits. Presumably any portrait would have been commissioned. One wouldn't just make a portrait and hope somebody was going to buy it. But in fact, of course, genre painting, still life painting would be made on spec and sold. There were lotteries and actual, sales. There were art dealers then, actually, in the 17th century. So they mostly would have been made on speculation, for people not familiar with it, hoping that someone would buy it.
Great. We have a question from Virginia Montgomery, who asks, is it clear that the artist herself did not paint over the skeleton in the last drop?
Yes. Yes, and that's certainly something that Mark Tucker would have been
very careful about.
That it was just one layer over it, and that it was always there, that it was, new paint. I mean, it was 100 years old already, but it was not something that was originally there. So this composition that you see today is what she intended.
Yeah, just a note that people are just giving a big thumbs up to the lovely painting of the young flute player. Everyone enjoys that very much.
Yeah. It is beautiful.
And Nicole, I have a question that goes back to your presentation. Why is it assumed that young woman drawing was painted by a woman?
That's a really great question, and I'm sorry if I was clumsy in my language there. I do not assume that it was painted by a woman. That was, I think, largely the basis for originally attributing it to Christina ter Borch. I think that she was another female artist who had only recently been rediscovered in the late 1800s. And so there was a lot of, right after she, her family albums were discovered, which preserved her work, but also works by her more famous brother and other siblings and father. There was a lot of kind of market interest in her work when they, and so there was sort of a ripple of paintings that became attributed to her, most of which have been now de-attributed. So there are no remaining oil paintings that are fully attributed to Christina ter Borch now. So I think that at the time, largely the connection was that she was a female artist who the dealer of the painting knew of and knew was kind of recently of interest. But I think it's very possible that it was painted by, it's equally possible that it was painted by a man or a woman, of a woman making art in some way. And it's also not clear whether it was in any way a portrait of a specific person or more of a kind of anonymized genre scene. There aren't very many portrayals in oil paintings of women actively producing art. Leister's self-portrait is a great exception to that. But they weren't all that common, but there is a small number. And so now we're trying to kind of work through different attribution possibilities. But since there's so little we know and there's no documentary evidence, it's anyone's guess at the moment.
Great. So if we could perhaps clarify, when the PMA acquired the work, who did they believe the last drop was painted by? Because it went through a series, right?
Yes, but I think they already knew it was by Leister. Yeah, because it was called as by her even in 1903. So
exactly.
And I want to add something to the question about a painting on spec or, having actual commissions. As the Tulip Pages, that Tulip Page that you saw, I think there's another one that I think is by her as well. Both are signed, that they would have been commissioned, that it would have been a catalog that was going to be made, and several different artists would have been doing the, drawing or painting the tulips for it. So watercolor on vellum.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Dina Peterson. So when the last drop was cleaned, they actually removed paint? How did they know how to do that? If you guys know details of the conservation process.
I wouldn't speak about that. I did visit when it was being done, but that's much more technical, and I don't want to misstate the way in which it was cleaned.
Fair enough. Yeah. Oh, so we have a question. Is the female figure in Carousing Couple a self-portrait?
Oh, that's interesting. There are several paintings that have a woman that certainly looks like Judith Leister. And yes, it's certainly possible that it is. And then some people have thought then the man was her husband to be, because they're not married yet. It's dated 1630, but he could have been in the shop as well. There are several paintings, one of a concert at the National Museum of Women in the Arts that has 3 musicians, and one does look like Judith Leister and the other Molinar. So yes, it's possible that she used herself as a model. You'd also have to remember that women artists were not, even until part of the 20th century, allowed in art studios for life drawing, and that drawing from life was something that only men could do in any kind of studio. Sometimes it wasn't really a rule about it, but it was just not done. And so that for a woman artist, that's one of the reasons so many of them painted still lifes, that they didn't have training in painting or knowing the structure of anatomy for the human body, that she may have in fact used herself frequently then as a subject.
I guess that makes me wonder if women just had also perhaps more limited models that they could paint from.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
It was also possibly the reason that women weren't in those studios, even if it was a female model, because those models were thought to be, and probably were, prostitutes. This is not to say anything about contemporary models, but certainly in the 17th century, who are you paying to take off your clothes, their clothes? So, that was the nature of the business usually, and didn't want then other women to be with them as well, or maybe it was just too embarrassing. I'm not sure, but they certainly were not permitted to do that.
Thank you. So somehow we're already at 12:59 p.m. So I'm going to ask one last question before we wrap things up. And this question comes from Joanne Malin, who asks, did Leister paint with her husband, possibly joining and co-painting his artworks? Did she paint works that were signed by her during her marriage?
Well, we have very little signed by her after her marriage. The Tulip Pages of 1643 are the only dated works we have by her after her marriage. I don't, however, think she stopped painting. And so she may have been painting with him, that they shared a studio. Certainly in their home after he dies, there's only one studio. And I do think that they probably worked together. We already know that she took care of the books and was at the notary with a ledger and dealt with the accounts. But it would seem unlikely that she completely stopped painting. But we don't really know what part of paintings she did with him. And sometimes it's very clear that he might have done the whole thing, or that he did some of the figures and she did the still life, or the other way around. But there is no signed work by her that's really his. That's what we know of today.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we do need to end. We are out of time, but these were just wonderful presentations. Huge thanks to both Frima and Nicole for sharing with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everyone for coming today. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much. And What Can Paintings Tell Us will be on view for a little while longer through much of the rest of this year. So I hope that if you're able to visit the museum, that you take a moment to check it out. And thank you so much to everyone. And many thanks to Frima for a great talk, and to Linnea and Greg also.
Thank you. And, obviously we're very grateful for the support of the Diskant Memorial Endowment that allows us to do this lecture every year. And we're really thankful that so many of you were able to join us today. It's really wonderful that we can connect with you from home, even in these times. And so thank you so much. And just a reminder that we are continuing to do virtual programming. And to that end, when you close this talk, a survey will pop up in your browser. And if you have any feedback, we'd be delighted to hear it. We also have an upcoming talk that I will just share in the chat, and that will also be in the follow-up email. It's on February 17th with photographer Judith Joy Ross. So another Judith, so you know it's got to be good. And I hope to see many of you for that. So with that, I just wish you all a great weekend. Thanks again.